Første taler Dariusz Leszczynski, som holder sitt innlegg på engelsk. Han har doktorgrad i molekylær biologi og ekspert innen biologiske og helsemessige effekter av stråling fra mobiltelefoner. Han assosiert professor i biokjemi ved Universitetet i Helsinki, og han var deltaker i Verdens helseorganisasjons kreftpanel da de vedtok å klassifisere mobilstråling eller radiofrekvent som mulig kreftfremkallende. Og i ettertid så har jeg da hørt at det var én stemme som manglet i det utvalget på at den ble klassifisert som det som heter 2A som kreftfremkallende. Så det er noe jeg tenker på. Det var én stemme imot. Dariusz Leszczynski var forskerprofessor ved det finske strålevernet i 13 år. Han ble utsatt for et sensurpress som han sikkert kommer til å nevne litt om. Og her får vi høre om sin forskergjerning og hvordan rammen for forskning er innenfor et nordisk land. Dariusz Leszczynski, I hope you are ready now. I've introduced you in Norwegian, so please, the floor is yours. We are looking very much forward to hear you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Unfortunately, I don't speak Swedish. It was enough to learn Finnish when I moved from Deltok to Finland. I'm very pleased to be here in this wonderful setting, and I would like also to thank very much fellow and Solveig for inviting me here. It's my pleasure to be here. I will be talking about wireless communication, health risk and precaution, or more rather precautionary principle. Who I am right now I'm unemployed. Those jobs that are listed here, I'm editor-in-chief of newly formed, just for me, journal Frontiers in Radiation and Health. This journal will be open for submissions in April, and it is published by Swiss publisher Frontiers and British journal Nature. And it is part of journal Frontiers in Public Health, so it shows what kind of topics it will be talking about. For those who don't know me so well, a few examples from my past experience. For 22 years I was working at Radiation Nuclear Safety Authority in Finland. In some years I was head of radiation biology lab, and due to disagreements with my research director, I resigned from this position, and I was for quite some time research professor, and my major interest or my major research was studying using proteomics effects of cell phone radiation on cells, both on in vitro and in human studies. I have 2 doctorates and docentship in biochemistry. I was in the past, simultaneously when I worked at STUK, I was also at Harvard, at Zhejiang University and at Swinburne University. And of other interesting things, I testified in US Senate hearing on cell phone radiation in 2009 and participated in IARC evaluation of cell phone radiation, carcinogenicity of cell phone radiation. We should always start with definition of health, and WHO is this organization that says us what is health. And although very many people disagree with definition of health which is provided by WHO, health is a state of complete physical, mental and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. Well, of course, I understand very well those who disagree with this definition, because if we look carefully at it, we all are sick. Because everybody of us will find something that we are physically not okay, or mentally not okay, or simply our social well-being is not really well. Therefore, we all are sick by definition of WHO. And whenever we discuss, for example, safety of radiation emitted by wireless communication devices, we need to remember this WHO definition, what is health? Because in some aspects, it might be useful to think also about it. Well, about safety standards and who sets them, they are set by ICNIRP, of course, the International Commission on Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection. And ICNIRP is a strange scientific body where membership is by invitation only. It is sort of like a private club. Namely, members of ICNIRP who are at this time, they're working at ICNIRP. When somebody is retiring, they are inviting applications. Different organizations, institutes, universities can send applications and propose candidates. But ICNIRP members who are members of ICNIRP decide whom they select or not. This is at their discretion. Therefore, it is no wonder that membership of ICNIRP is based on similarity of scientific opinion, because then, of course, it's very easy to get consensus and to agree on certain things, like safety standards, like what certain scientific evidence means or what it doesn't mean. So it helps in work. One important problem, what I see with ICNIRP, is no accountability for ICNIRP experts. And there are two types of this accountability. First of all, of course, is this that what if they are wrong? This is one problem. So they decide what scientific evidence means. Supposedly it is to the best of their scientific ability, but they don't want to discuss with others. For example, some years ago, I put forward an initiative to get together, for example, ICNIRP and BioInitiative, and discuss issues which are disagreements. Well, neither ICNIRP nor BioInitiative wanted to work with each other. Their opinions are so polarized that those organizations and people in them don't want even to talk to each other. Well, of course, when all experts within ICNIRP have very similar scientific opinions, then this scientific debate is very limited, and there is no arguing what is better or worse interpretation of science. And of course, WHO EMF project recommends use of ICNIRP safety standards all around the world. They would like that every country in the world would use ICNIRP safety standards, because it would be easy. Everybody has the same safety standards. But why ICNIRP is so important and WHO spreads this safety standards recommended by ICNIRP, because of course when WHO established EMF project, head of this project was ICNIRP chairman. Therefore it is very, very easy to understand why ICNIRP got into such a highly recognized position. Some example from Finland, and I think it is not happening only in Finland, sort of circle. We have an ICNIRP that sets safety standards. Then WHO recommends that those safety standards will be used. Then in Finland, ministry is considering should we use them or not. So what they do? They ask proper authority in Finland, named STUK, to provide opinion, should we use or not ICNIRP standards. Then STUK expert recommends use of ICNIRP standards because they are good. And of course, this STUK expert is a member of ICNIRP who developed the safety standards. And this way, circle closes. So meaning, it is sort of, one can wonder how unbiased opinions are when, for example, Finnish ministry received information that ICNIRP safety standards are correct and they should be implemented also in Finland.
Excuse me, could I ask you what STUK means?
STUK, it is abbreviation of Säteilyturvakeskus. It is Radiation and Nuclear Safety Authority in Finland, which regulates use of all radiation in Finland. So it is something like SSE in Sweden. There are some shortcomings with safety standards, and one major is that they are based on thermal effects and only thermal effects. There is no accounting for other parameters of exposure. The dosimetry is based on macro-scale temperature changes. If there is increase of temperature less than 1 degree Celsius, they consider it as safe. There is complete lack of micro-scale dosimetry, and I will explain about this a little more. Models that are used do not resemble living cells and organs, models that are used for dosimetry. And of course, comparisons to classical heating do not apply in this case. Macro-scale dosimetry, well, we have this comparison. We have our brain, and according to dosimetry, this is sort of plastic mold filled with water, sugar, and salt so that this water contains similar amount of ions as in our brain. And this resembles, it is supposed to represent our brain, meaning this, say, bucket with water is our brain. And there is one major problem, is free movement of ions. In this kind of setting like this, ions can move freely. There are no barriers, just mold is barrier. And whereas in brain, they cannot. Because if you go to micro-scale dosimetry, this dosimetry model, what is sort of, one can think that is used, it is sort of, cell is this kind of homogeneous stuff. Whereas cell is not really homogeneous stuff. There is a lot of membranes, compartments, which are separated from each other. And ions don't move freely. If they would move freely, we would all be dead. Because all life in our cell, in our body, is based on electricity, on electric charges being here or there, not everywhere. And there are mechanisms on those membranes, there are specialized proteins, different kind of so-called pumps that are making this, that ions are on this side where they should be, that electric potential is working, not that ions move freely, everything gets saturated evenly, and then there's no any electricity, no any electric potential, no any electric charges, and no life. So these models that are used in dosimetry are not really reliable. They are old models, old-fashioned, outdated, and why they are still in use, I don't know. But when they were taken into use, this, say, bucket with water and salt, that was in time when our computers were very poor and their computing powers were very low. Therefore, it was necessary to simplify models as much as possible that these computers could crunch numbers enough well to find distribution of electromagnetic field in this kind of model. Nowadays, these computers are better, but still these models were not improved, and they are still this kind of bucket with water models of our brain. There are other problems also associated with safety standards. First of all, we do not have information whether and how cell phone radiation affects humans. This is a very funny thing, and nobody thinks about it really. We all the time discuss issue, is cell phone radiation harmful to humans? But what do we know how cell phone radiation affects human body physiology? We don't know. Absolutely, we don't know. Because this what we have, experiments on humans, is we have epidemiological studies that indicate indirectly that there can be some effects. We have studies where people were exposed and then they were asked, how do you feel? Do you feel anything or do you feel something? What is absolutely scientifically unreliable information. It's not objective information. And studies that would be examining really physiological properties of our body have not been done on humans. And therefore, since we don't know how this radiation affects humans, whenever you're saying our safety standards have safety margins and they provide protection for anybody, grown-up, adult, baby, pregnant, sick, whatever, whomever you figure out, they protect. How we can be sure that they protect when we even don't know how this radiation affects human body physiologically? Then there's also another problem is that any equipment radiating below safety standards is considered as safe, which might be misleading. Of course, we don't know whether those safety standards are correct, whether they are good to protect everybody, and therefore it might be a little misleading. But this causes another thing, that compliance with safety standards when new equipment is produced is used as an excuse to stop research funding and to deploy new wireless technologies without testing. Because it is possible to say, and what industry is saying, we are having new technology, it is wonderful, it will make miracles in our life, but is it safe? Yes, because it emits radiation which is below current safety standards. It is safe. So there's no need to bother about this, no need to test it, just deploy it because it is safe. It meets all our safety standards. And of course, non-thermal effects, they exist. But the problem is that majority of non-thermal effects have been shown in laboratory studies, on cells grown in laboratory. And this is the problem, because later on, there were not continued these studies that if we find something in cells in laboratory, this is not enough. Then scientists didn't go further to find out whether this same event, this same process is happening in human body. Because then, if this what is happening in cell in laboratory would be confirmed that it is happening in human body, then it is valid non-thermal effect. Right now we have a lot of non-thermal effects shown in cells, and then everybody can say, well, it was not shown in human that it is, we don't have evidence that it is happening in humans. But very often when we hear, or when you hear this sentence, we don't have evidence that it is happening in humans, be cautious, because most likely this we don't have evidence is not because studies were done and something was shown or not, because studies were not done. So most of this, when we are hearing this, we don't have evidence that this causes some problem. It's not because we have this, some sort of evidence. Mostly it is because we didn't do studies at all. In 2011, in May, was this IARC evaluation, and this what is, one could say, when IARC evaluates, it is sort of golden standard. And before this evaluation, nobody thought that it will be classified as any kind of carcinogen, cell phone radiation or radiation emitted by wireless communication. That came as a great surprise that it was classified as possible carcinogen, 2B. They were invited 30 experts, Lennart Gardell was there and I was there, and we were divided in 4 different groups: dosimetry, epidemiology, animal studies, and mechanistic laboratory in vitro studies. And decisions in each group and also in the whole working group were made by consensus, that we all agreed, yep, this is so. or by voting by simple majority. So if out of one vote was enough to keep the balance. And vast majority of members of this working group voted for possible carcinogen classification. That was very, very surprising, but since there were possibilities that something even worse may happen, maybe even 2A could be considered, therefore it was no wonder that very many members of this expert group voted very eagerly for 2B to prevent anything further. When we think about epidemiology, most of weight was given to Interphone and to Hagdal studies from Sweden, but there is of course a problem, this reliability of exposure data, because most of this exposure data is based on this what we remember. Do we remember how many phone calls or how long we were using cell phone 10 years ago or 11? Do you remember how many emails you sent last week? I don't remember, unless I of course check my log. So these are the sort of things that people were asked to reconstruct their life 10 years ago or longer time. So this kind of exposure data are sort of not very reliable. But in any case, in those studies, there was shown increasing risk of getting brain cancer in long-term ARID users. And long-term ARID user, that was a person who used for at least 10 years, for 10 years or more, cell phone, and who was talking, well, not so very much, because half an hour per day for these 10 years. So it is not very long exposure that we are talking every day for half an hour. I think that many people do it much more nowadays, but then when these studies were done, it was something in around year 2000 when those exposures were happening. Talking on the phone was much more expensive, there were no 3 minutes and so on. So people were talking much less on cell phone as compared right now. Then after IARC evaluation, there were published a couple of studies, and they are being referred that after IARC evaluation, there were published epidemiological studies that show that there is no effect and that IARC evaluation is not really anymore valid. And somehow surprisingly or not surprisingly, IARC itself is having this sort of opinion, that Danish cohort study, which was published afterwards, so-called update of Danish cohort studies and Million Women study, that they are showing that there is no effect. But if you read, and I have written about this, for example, Danish cohort, I have written about this, and it was published in American journal, The Scientist. These exposure data are so messed up and so mixed up, and there is such an unknown contamination of control groups by highly exposed persons that this data is absolutely unreliable. And in fact, I was calling even for a retraction of this study. But nowadays it is kind of difficult to retract any study unless something is shown to be scientific misconduct, so we falsifying data. So, in my opinion, Danish cohort and Million Women study do not invalidate IARC evaluation of epidemiology. Then, when IARC was evaluating the children's studies, we have only, in fact, one cephalo study, unless I'm mistaken. But this is a study where exposures were only for 2 to 4 years, so very short exposures, what it can show. And it had very few cases, meaning that there was no statistical power, what authors themselves admitted, no statistical power to find small risk. If the risk would be big, they could find it. So meaning if you hit somebody with hammer, will feel pain. If you tickle with feather, you don't know. And that was the problem with this cephalo study, not enough statistical power. Then in 2012 was published a study in US where was shown that slow rise of brain cancer cases in US, and the trend was similar to this trend which was eventually would be predicted by Interphone, but lesser than in trend what would be predicted from Cardell studies. But anyway, there are studies showing that brain cancer is on rise. Whether we can say that cell phone radiation or wireless communication is the only guilty party, we don't know. But anyway, brain cancer is on rise. Then when we are thinking about human studies, and this is what I was already mentioning earlier, vast majority are so-called feeling studies. So meaning they gather a bunch of people, and sometimes they gather a bunch of people who say that they are electrosensitive. Then they expose them to radiation or to sham radiation, so meaning radiation is not present but this person doesn't know. And then they are asked afterwards, what do you feel? Do you feel anything what you say about symptoms of EHS, this kind of very non-specific? Do you have some headache or tingling in skin, or do you feel some heating sensations and so on? And another question is also given, do you know when radiation is on or off? That this is sort of scientific proof of this, that whether you are electrosensitive and this kind of electrosensitivity exists or not. Well, tell me when X-ray machine is on or off by feeling this radiation. This is not any proof. It is simply, of course, if people would feel, then you can say, all right, it might be so. But if people don't feel, it is not any proof that there is no effect. And in my opinion, EHS as such as disease must exist. Why? Because otherwise, wireless communication radiation would be the only agent that would be such that it not causes individual sensitivity among people. If you are thinking UV radiation, if you are thinking different drugs, if you are thinking pollen and so on, everything what we are experiencing in our environment, there is always possible to find a group of people who will be more sensitive because of their genetic makeup. They will be more sensitive to everything. Why RF would be this exception, the one and only that would have no such a more sensitive subgroup? Problem is only what radiation level is this radiation level that should be, that is this that it causes or not, or is there any radiation level or any radiation level, or any radiation level causes it? This we don't know, because we don't know how this radiation affects human physiology, and we don't have a test for measuring it objectively, because measuring it by just exposing person and asking how do you feel is not objective, not scientific measure. And of course, when those studies are done, there are invited people, for example, so-called normal people, so then they don't have any reactions, and those sort of normal meaning non-EHS people. And then there are, of course, also invited EHS people. But there can be also this sort of problem that many of those who think that they are EHS might be not EHS. Those EHS symptoms are very non-specific. They can be caused by different things also. They can be caused even by regular stress. If we are very stressed because of something happening in our life, it also can cause this. Pollen can cause similar symptoms and so on. Therefore, it is possible that some people think, I might be EHS, but they are sensitive to something else. They misdiagnose themselves. And if we think that this group of 20, 30, 40 persons is taken to experimental study, and part of them are not really EHS, but they are sensitive to something else, they get similar symptoms, but they are not caused by electromagnetic fields, then this whole experimental group is screwed up. This whole study is messed up, because then those who are not really sensitive to electromagnetic radiation will give answers different from those who are sensitive. And when you average all this, you don't get anywhere. And then is, of course, another problem is that EHS is domain studied by psychologists. And this is the problem. Because they are using wrong methods. Namely, they are using those methods, ask people how they feel, what they feel, and so on. And these are wrong methods. It's necessary to take physiologists and check out how organs are working in our body. And then, getting back to this definition of health and how to consider it, IARC classification justifies it by this mental and social well-being, this EHS concerns. Because if cell phone radiation, wireless communication radiation, is considered possible carcinogen, then it is absolutely normal that people, or some people, will be worried, concerned, will be mentally affected by this worry, and this way their health, in definition of WHO, is not okay. They are not healthy. And this what we are missing is lack of studies examining biochemical responses of human tissues. We don't have those studies. We have one skin proteomic study that has been done by my research group when I was working still at STUK. We got results that there are possible some changes, and our funding was cut off. And there are two studies examining glucose metabolism in the brain during exposure. One study was done in US and it has shown increase in glucose metabolism. Another study has been done in Finland and it has shown decline. But of course, depending on timing and methods, this glucose is not only going up, but it has to go down and up and down. Changes. Therefore, both studies have shown that there are changes in glucose metabolism. And depending on time points that you examine, you may hit it in a moment when it is on rise, or you may hit it when it is on decline. And that's all. This is all what we know, how this cell phone radiation, or wireless communication radiation, affects physiology of our body. This is all. These three studies. Then when we are thinking about animal studies, there is no classical toxicology possible in animal studies, because by classical toxicology approach, RF would be judged as harmful to humans and should be avoided. Classical toxicology does this, that we take animal, rat, mouse, whatever animal, and we feed it large overdose of examined factor or radiation chemical. And then, this overdose is such that human never encounters in life this kind of overdose. And if this animal develops some sickness, cancer, whatever, dies, then we think this chemical might be also dangerous for people and we should limit exposures to it. But when animal doesn't die, we think that since it was such an overdose and nothing happened to this animal, so most likely people are safe. And this is wrongly transformed to cell phone radiation. First of all, we cannot, in our studies, overexpose rat or mice to high doses of this radiation, because in the end we would cook them. So that's what is this harmful effect. If we give toxicology, by toxicology standards, high overdose of this radiation, then we cook this animal, we kill it, meaning it is harmful. So this, what we are left with is another toxicological approach, where we are giving to the animal over whole life dose of agent that we are examining, which is similar to this doses that people are experiencing in their life, and we are looking what is happening. And if this animal that was getting for lifetime chemical or radiation, like cell phone radiation, developed some health problems, then we think it might be so that also people will develop. But if this animal doesn't develop any health problems, it doesn't tell us that people will not. Because even though we have this it's very similar genetic makeup with mice and rats, we are not mice and rats. And different genes that we have and rat or mouse have, even though they are belonging to the same group of genes regulating cancer, different genes regulate cancer in human and in mouse. Meaning, we have a gene A and gene B. In mouse, gene A regulates cancer, and this, if it is affected, mouse will get cancer. But the same cancer is regulated by gene B in human, very closely related to gene A but gene B. And if gene B is not being affected in humans, humans will not develop any cancer. So there is this problem that it is, if in animal study, lifetime exposure to low doses of radiation, this kind of that humans are encountering in their life, if there is happening something, we can be worried. If there is happening nothing, we don't know anything. We are in starting point. And then, of course, in IARC evaluation, and in this classical toxicology setting, most of studies which were examined by IARC were really this kind of that lifetime exposures were not causing anything. And this is used as excuse to say, well, if lifetime exposure of mouse or rat doesn't cause anything to it, so people are safe. No, this is a lie. Because it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't say that yes or no. We don't know what is happening in humans. But there were co-carcinogen studies showing some effects when animals were exposed to, for example, ultraviolet radiation and cell phone radiation at the same time. So there can be some co-carcinogenic effects of chemicals and radiation. One thing when we are thinking about toxicology, nobody is speaking about that with cell phone radiation we cannot really do toxicological studies, kind of classical where we give high overdose. But when we think about base stations, then they emit 100 or 1,000 times less of radiation than our cell phone. Therefore, when we make experiment using radiation level that is emitted by our cell phone, it is resembling toxicological study where we are exposing animal to base station radiation which is 100 or 1,000 times higher than normal would be. So we need like in toxicological studies. So if there are observed any effects, then we can always think, could base station radiation be of some risk to humans? And of course there were mechanistic studies where we were looking, I was in this group, to find out whether there is any evidence for biochemical mechanism, how radiation, this cell phone radiation could be inducing cancer or any other health problems. And there was, by voting, final decision was that there is insufficient evidence, but not everybody agreed on this, but democratic voting made it this way. But not necessarily it is so that we don't know mechanism. Here is something what very schematically shown different stress response pathways. Stress response, it is a response inside the, let's say, in everyday life we have a stress and we respond. But this is completely different thing from this what is happening inside the cell. Inside the cell there is a set of proteins that respond to stress, to external agents by protecting cells. So if something what is disturbing normal working of cell, living cell, is happening in the environment of the cell, then the cell triggers a response to protect itself. It is so-called stress response. So there are certain proteins, genes activated that produce new proteins. There is happening a lot of biochemically to protect this cell that it survives this unwanted influence. And there are different stress pathways. It doesn't matter right now, there's a lot of green boxes here, different names of proteins and that are involved in this. But they were done, for example, here is listed a set of 6 studies. Each was done using different exposure, different animal models or cellular models. And in all of them has been shown that stress response is affected, and clearly in all these studies few stress proteins were, when they were examined, were shown to be affected. Therefore, it is possible to think, and I think, that one of the mechanisms how cell phone radiation could affect what is happening in our cells and what can end up as for example, brain cancer, is activation of stress response, because once it is activated, these certain molecules go inside this nucleus in the cell and activate genes that are involved in proliferation of cells, in regulation of cancer. So there is not really, I'm not sure whether we don't know mechanism, but we simply don't want to admit it, and at IARC it was voted down. And scale of potential problem, and we are already discussing this brain cancer. Brain cancer is rare disease. It is really rare disease because it is, depending on country and depending whether you are a man or woman, it is some less than 20 cases per 100,000 people. So it is very rare. And even these increases, which are predicted by either Interphone study or Hardell studies, would lead to this, that there would be something like 30, 40 cases per 100,000 people. So it means that this disease would remain to be a rare disease. So always, even when using cell phone, one would think, no, why I would get it out of this 100,000 people, why me? When there are just 30, 40 people getting it. But if we are thinking society, when we are thinking that there are 5 billion users, even this small increase in brain cancer will become expensive for the society, because it will be rare disease for us, but it will be costly for society because it will be necessary to treat those patients. There will be lost productivity for those persons and for all their families around them, friends and so on. So this will be having quite a big impact on society if really this kind of increase in brain cancer will happen. So it is sizable not only in monetary but also in human suffering terms. And that's why we are so interested, and we should clear it out what is the problem. And one of ways to try to limit these exposures and make industry to be involved more in research and finding out what their product is doing to our health or what is not doing to our health, is by invoking precautionary principle. And here is a quote from this document, European Commission document on precautionary principle, and there are specified certain circumstances when precautionary principle can be invoked. And this is then when we have scientific information that is insufficient, inconclusive, or uncertain, when there are indications that possible effects on the environment or human animal might be potentially dangerous. And we are inconsistent with the level of protection. And when we look at this more closely, scientific information is insufficient, inconclusive, or uncertain. IARC classification tells us this, that classifying this cell phone radiation as possible carcinogen, we have this proof that we have scientific information that is insufficient, inconclusive, and uncertain. We have some indications, but we don't have certainty. There are indications that the possible effects on human health may be potentially dangerous. Yeah, the same classification shows that if epidemiological studies indicate increasing risk in brain cancer, this is a potentially dangerous situation. So this is this harmful effect. And finally, that this what we are doing is inconsistent with the chosen level of protection. So this what also not very often people think of, that epidemiological studies showing this increased risk in long-term habit use were generated studying people who were using regular cell phones. So we all go to shop and buy a cell phone. It is a safe cell phone because it meets all safety standards that our government is saying that it should meet, that WHO says, that ICNIP says. It is safe cell phone. But when we use the cell phone for half an hour, for 10 years or longer, our risk of getting brain cancer is increasing. At least these studies, this information we have right now at hand. So what it means? So it means that apparently those safety standards are not sufficient to protect us from this increase of risk of brain cancer. So it means that those current safety standards are insufficient to protect users. Because by using this safe device, hopefully in shop, we can get increased risk of brain cancer. If somebody likes to read more about this or have written text in EMR and Health, this is a journal published by EMR Australia, there is a story about cell phone radiation, health risk and precaution that I have written there, so there is a longer article explaining what I think. And something what is very recent also, in December, Nordic radiation safety authorities published a statement, and according to the statement, everything is fine, there is no any problem, we all are safe, and those who think otherwise are badly mistaken, to say it gently. But it is, when you read this statement, it is a clear example of cherry picking. So those authorities pick evidence that is fitting to them, and they say this is what it is. And for example, there is a statement. Since 2011, number of epidemiological studies on mobile phone use and risk of brain tumors have been published, and overall data on brain tumor and mobile phone use do not show any effect on tumor risk. They are referring to Danish cohort study and million women study. Please read those studies, and especially when you read Danish cohort study, be sure to be close to some trash bin, because this is this kind of study that you read it, you wonder how it was possible to waste so much money and publish it in peer-reviewed journal, and after reading it, trash it. And also, there is another statement that available literature to date does not show any increased risk. In this, they nullify this what IARC said, because this what was said in IARC evaluation is still valid, and it should be acknowledged, if not by regular people, then at least health authorities around the world should acknowledge it. This IARC evaluation is gold standard. Those IARC publications, these books that are published after evaluation, and this book was published, I got this kind of really heavy, big book from IARC. These are considered gold standard in this area of evaluating carcinogenicity of cell phone radiation or any agent. And therefore, by saying this type of thing, the Nordic authorities simply dismiss all IARC classification. But somehow this is surprising. And of course, conclusions. First of all, IARC classification is a sufficient reason for invoking precautionary principle. And claim that the current safety standard protect all users are not sufficiently supported by scientific evidence. We don't simply have enough science to say that everybody is really well protected. Talking that there are some wide margins doesn't really help. Current safety standards should be urgently revised to better reflect available science. And what is important is users should be informed about the current scientific uncertainty and advised to limit exposures whenever possible and feasible. It is not, whenever I talk, I'm not recommending stop using, trash your cell phone, and so on. No, we cannot live without it. We are well beyond point of no return. We have to live with it. But there are two things. One, what we can choose ourselves, so how much we use this cell phone and in which way we use this. Sorry. What we can ourselves regulate. And also, this what is necessary to think that would be important to put some pressure on the industry to develop this technology better. Because there are always better ways of doing things where will be less radiation needed, less energy needed, and so on. It's necessary to put only brains to it and develop this technology. Industry is never willing to do something what will cost it and will cause it troubles before, and that they have to develop something new what not automatically brings money. If you consider this, that safety belts in cars, industry very strongly opposed installation of safety belts in cars, which are known to save lives. And only federal government in US forced industry to do it. Therefore, there are technologies that could be developed, they could be made better, and they could be made safer, or could be made this kind of that they are of less concern for general public, but they will not happen by free will of industry. There has to be put pressure from governments and from politicians, from new laws, that this type of changes will take place. One thing what is also important when talking about using cell phones, it's very important not to keep cell phone close to body, like in your pocket, because sometimes people use Bluetooth and cell phone is in pocket, and okay, then they don't expose so much their brain, but they expose other places, because the cell phone is radiating full energy of what is that would otherwise emit to brain somewhere else, to your heart or other part of body. Because one important thing what people don't know is this, that when you once you put cell phone in your pocket, safety standards go down the drain. They don't keep anymore. Because cell phone fulfills safety standards on radiation emissions and absorption by our body when it is about 2.5 centimeters away from our body. Once it is closer to our body, those safety standards don't work anymore. And then, of course, one can ask, well, yeah, but I have to keep it in my hand or I put it to my ear. So what's that problem? Yeah, then also the safety standards don't work, but there is distinction within our body of those important parts which are here and those so-called extremities which are less important. So our hands are considered as extremities. They are not so important. They don't contain inside any vital organs like heart, liver, or brain, and therefore they can be exposed more than our heart or brain. So these are extremities. And then when you think, but when I put it to my head to talk, no, I put it to my brain. No, that is extremity. This is our extremity. This works, our ear works as this spacer, this 1 inch, this 2.5 centimeter. But when you put your phone, it is from your head, sort of by this spacer made a little bit further. And this is an important part, this is extremity. Therefore, some parts of our body, like our hands or our ear, are considered less vital to our life, and they can be exposed a little more, because of course, somewhere you have to put this phone, somehow you have to keep it, and so on. But this is a very important thing. Don't put cell phone close to your body in your pocket, especially when talking on the phone and using Bluetooth or wire, because then this radiation is absorbed somewhere else, not in your brain, but somewhere else. And of course, children who will have a long time of usage should be encouraged to limit exposures, and this should be really extended even more. Now is quite a big debate about these wireless connections or wireless internet in schools. It is obvious that in school you have to have internet, because right now there is no life without internet. I cannot manage a day without thinking, sorry, what is this or what is that? What I do? Google it, and then you have all information. So you have to have it. But there are places where you cannot manage with wires. So for example, if you like to provide internet for people in railway station, you cannot imagine that there are wires and then everybody is connected. So this is wireless connection. Has to be for practical reasons. But schools are one place where wireless is not needed. School is such infrastructure that you can put in there wires. You have a student's desk, you have a certain classrooms where you can have sufficient number of wires, and students connect their laptops or iPads or whatever devices via wire to internet, and you don't need wireless connection, wireless internet in school. And what is of course, one can ask, but why? We don't know anything that Wi-Fi would cause any health effects to children. Yeah, we don't know. We didn't show anything like this because we didn't study this subject at all. There are no studies on it. There are maybe a couple of studies on wireless internet effects. So this that we have, we hear that, but wireless has not been shown to be harmful. First of all, wireless has not been studied. That's the first point. And whenever it is possible to avoid exposures, it should be done. And school is one place where it can be done. It will, of course, cost some money to install those wires, but it can be done. And the reason is simple. Those 6-year-old kids are coming there and will be spending their long time, and then when they are grown up and so on, they will be exposed for really, really long periods to wireless communication radiation. And they will have not this like we older people maybe will have 20, 30 years before we pass away. They will have 80, 90 years of these exposures before, so meaning full lifetime. And therefore, and this we don't know absolutely at all, whether it will have any effects or whether our body, which is very, very moldable, will adjust to all this radiation and develop some systems to cope with this over time when it is for very long time exposed. And one important issue is that research should continue to find out how human body reacts to cell phone radiation. Because as I said, we don't know it. We know only this what epidemiology indirectly says, or studies that there are, people are asked how they feel, what is absolutely unreliable. And if you often hear that we have thousands and thousands of studies and they are showing no effect and so on, that there are tens of thousands of studies published. That is not truth either. Cell phone radiation studies that examine exactly exposures to cell phone radiation frequencies are less than 1,000 so far. So there are very few studies, and when each of these studies examine different things, some in vitro, some animal studies, something human studies, there are very few studies spread over a variety of topics and exposures, so meaning that we have very little evidence at this time, evidence provided by less than 1,000 studies that examined effects of cell phone radiation on humans. Thank you. Do I now answer questions or?
Yes. Now we have about 5 minutes for questions.
For example, with gliomas, there's a huge chemotrix. This talk here is fine, but it's like preaching to the converted. And how are we supposed to deal with that when you just showed the 2012 Nordic recommendations? It's like partisan science.
No, science is one. What is partisan is interpretation of this science. And this we cannot help. There is a group of scientists, I call them pro-ICNIRP, pro-industry activists, who are saying it doesn't matter what evidence you show them, they say never is enough. And there is also a group of activists on the other side, like Bioinitiative, who consider any sign of any effect to be dangerous health effect. There are effects and health effects. Biological effects, when they are, it doesn't mean that they will cause health effects. So finding biological effects, and many studies have found biological effects, it doesn't mean that those biological effects will transfer into harmful health effects. At the same time, if there are no biological effects, then there will be never any health effects. So since we have biological effects, we can suspect that health effects are possible, but what is most worrisome is that we don't do proper studies to find those health effects. We dump all money on epidemiology, which is science that is not very sensitive to show effects. If there is a lot of disease happening in population, it is easily found by epidemiology. If there is little of this disease happening, epidemiology is not enough sensitive to show it, and often it can show it this way that some people will interpret this data, well, this is showing some small increase, others say, well, this small increase, is it important or not, or is it some glitch just because epidemiology is not certainty, but it is probability, higher or lower probability of something. So I think that what we for tens of years already made mistakes, and what we have done wrong is that we didn't study proper things. We didn't expose people and look what is happening in people, but this is what I remember, for example, in year 2000, when European Union funded 3 different research projects, there was a very strong pressure from the industry that only research projects considering epidemiology should be funded. That was this famous Interphone project which was done. But so meaning that there is strong pressure to do certain studies, but strong opposition to do another studies. As I, from my own experience, know, when I wanted to study people, first I didn't get money, then after consideration my group got money for a pilot study to prove that we can show something. Once we have shown something, our money was cut off, and we were simply, at STUK, we were simply forbidden to study EHS as a topic.
And that's an incredibly important point. It has to be advertised. And that is absolutely shocking.
Yeah, well, I am advertising it very, very strongly and very heavily, and over a number of years, and that's why I'm right now here, and that's why I'm unemployed at the moment. Yeah, cell phone works on our cells and has cell phone radiation has effects on our living cells, of course, yes. And yes, it is very much, I always thought, and I'm still thinking, that courtrooms or political fora are not good for science. But at some point, there are only options to make that science will happen. Because funding of research studies in this area, there are two sources of funding. Either government funds you or industry funds you. Governments are poor and there is a lot of crisis and they are cutting wherever they can spending. And so there is very little money. Secondly, when WHO and IARC and other organizations are assuring that, well, we are all safe, we have good safety standards, so then governments or different research foundations think, no, if there is everything okay, safety standards are in place and they don't look at this more closely, so let's spend money on something more important, more urgent, lack of water in Africa or whatever. So, which will bring more results and faster. And then we are ended up with this, that governments finally sometime under pressure decide, let's do something, let's do a research project. And then when they don't have money, they go to industry to sponsor it. And there are strings attached. That industry wants to know on what kind of research project money will be spent, who will be participating there, and so on and so forth. So in these preparatory stages of research projects, industry is involved. Even if it will be happening really so that once scientists get money for doing research project, they can do it in peace and publish whatever results they got in peace without any interference from anybody. If in this stage of preparing research project, discussing what methods will be used, how things will be examined, what things will be examined, if there is interference from the industry, it has impact on this, what finally results will be published. And in the end also, scientists are not stupid people. They very well know that depending on what kind of results they will publish, their funding will continue or will not continue. And if they get clear-cut data, then of course it will be misconduct to say otherwise, so they publish this what they get. But when data are often very ambivalent, and not only because they should be ambivalent, but because methods used to study certain topic were not best selected, or approach how to study it was not best selected, and well, sometimes maybe industry scientists influenced this, how it was developed. So when this kind of results are a little bit ambivalent, so it is relatively easy to interpret them this way. Well, yes, or well, no, or maybe yes, maybe no, let's say uncertain. And this way it is easily to say that, all right, but there is not really any strong evidence towards this or that. And this way, let's say, assure further funding, that one is not looked as a scientist who is providing evidence that is interfering with business and so on. So there is a lot of problems, and it will never end as long as we have this type of gathering of research funds as we have right now. Because if it is gathering funds by this that scientists or governments or foundations want to make a research project and then go to industry, please give money, then industry of course has power and has influence what will be done, how will be done. It should not be done this way. It should be done this way, that industry is producing product that might affect human health, as IARC evaluation said. What it means, that industry should be taxed based on how big business they are making, taxed on this for research tax, which money should go to certain foundations or places where industry doesn't have any influence on this, how much they give, when they give, and so on. This money goes there for research, and research is done, and industry, governments don't have anything to do with this, but scientists govern this research money, and then it may improve. As long as it is this way, that whenever any research project is being established, government or foundation or somebody goes to industry asking for money, it is bad connection. There's talk about making firewalls, but those firewalls don't work. Written by that.
Maybe everybody knows what I'm asking, but then I get information or not. I'm just wondering, are the safety standards different from country to country? Because I've heard that the safety is very, we are at a higher risk in Norway compared to other countries. Do you know anything about that?
Safety standards are slightly different in different countries, and in Russia they are very different. In China they are also to a degree different, and also in some European countries or in some areas, for example in Belgium, in Brussels, there are slightly different safety standards in France, in Italy, in Switzerland. So there are countries where under public pressure, governments were forced, either local or national governments were forced to make changes in safety standards, so meaning make those safety standards more tight. Yes, there are places where are different standards than these standards what are given by IARC and them.
Yes, I wanted to thank you for a very interesting presentation and for your continuing struggle. I just have a short question of clarification. Did you say that only 3 studies exist of the effects on human tissue that you mentioned, or were only these 3 studies considered by the IARC evaluation and disregarded others, or is it really such a bad lack of knowledge that only 3 studies exist?
Yeah, it is such a bad lack of knowledge. We have only those 3 studies which really where people were exposed, and then some biochemical properties of body were examined. So only those 3 studies. Those 3 studies, since they are not really directly related to cancer, were in a way considered but not very heavily by IARC, because we have to remember IARC evaluates only evidence that is related directly to cancer, whether something is carcinogenic or not. So for example, all studies that concern EHS were not evaluated at IARC because it is not cancer. So this way. But indeed, we have only 3 this kind of studies that unless I'm missing something was in recent months.
We've been using mobile phone for more than 10 years. Are the brain cancer increasing significantly?
Well, there is information from cancer registries that brain cancer is on rise, but this rise is not so very dramatic this way that one could if listening to some people, one could expect that there should be epidemics of brain cancer. This is not happening, and therefore industry, IARC, they are saying that apparently there is no any problem. But brain cancer is slowly increasing, like for example in US, the same in Finland, in Denmark. So there are relatively good registries of cancer. There is seen trend of increasing in brain cancer, although there is not possible directly to relate it to cell phone radiation, because there is not any, in this increase, there is no any certain spike that, oh, then cell phone technology was introduced and 10 years later we have spike. So it is not possible, so simple way and connected between cell phone radiation and brain cancer. But there is increase in brain cancer, and this trend data is necessary to simply follow. But one has to remember also this sort of thing, that when a nuclear bomb exploded in Hiroshima, many people died, but many people survived. And ionizing radiation is one of potential risk factors for brain cancer. And how many years it was necessary to wait to see development of brain cancer caused by Hiroshima explosion? That was over 50 years. And that was blast of nuclear bomb producing a lot of ionizing radiation, which can cause brain cancer, but it was necessary to wait for this kind of strong stimulus for next 50 years to see increase in brain cancer among Hiroshima survivors. But the same thing is possible to consider, for example, asbestos is causing lung cancer, or tobacco is causing lung cancer. It was also necessary to wait for really tens of years to see those effects. But there is also necessary to remember that, for example, tobacco that causes lung cancer, will everybody who smokes get lung cancer? No, very few are getting really lung cancer from tobacco. Even tobacco is considered carcinogenic and causes lung cancer. So it is also necessary to think that even though it would happen so that certain agent is causing brain cancer, not necessarily everybody will get it. We are so different that some of us will get it, some of us will not get it. And this is also part of the problem, that we have slow increase in brain cancer, we have dramatic increase in technology. People say there is a disparity. Cancer is rising very slowly, technology is rising, exposure is rising very much. So there is apparently nothing to do. But not everybody will get brain cancer. So this dramatic increase in technology doesn't mean that it will translate in dramatic rise of brain cancer. Brain cancer will be much smaller if it is caused by this technology. What we, at the moment, we still don't have certainty.
I'm worried about the cocktail effect of all the radiation exposure we are living with. And in Norway, the last 10 years, the authorities have allowed mentioning of base stations in residential areas everywhere. And all sellers have one base station each, which means that we can have 3 or 4 at one roof. And inside the homes, we are now using wireless networks for our cell phones, iPhones, which is now also not only telephone, but also internet. And they are dropping the cable they used to have for the computers. Which means that in a residential area, we are now sleeping with this radiation effects, and we are living with them all the time we are at home. And when we walk without work, when we are in the office, we are also there exposed from a very, very heavy number of, large number of base stations in the city where we are working, and also these wireless networks in addition to the cell phone every day, which means that in 24 hours we are exposed. How will that affect our body? I mean, the research made is for one cell phone, but no, the total effect is so huge. So I wonder, is there any kind of surgery
that's the problem, and some people were interested and wanted to do this type of research, examining, as you say, cocktails of radiation, and there is no research. Nobody is doing it, and has not been done. One problem might be also that, of course, this kind of research is possible to do with animals or with cells in laboratory. But with humans it's rather difficult because we don't have control population. Where you find control population in Norway that is not exposed? Everybody is exposed, more or less. So that is very, very difficult to find control populations of how to make study. So the only way would be to get volunteers and expose them and examine how their health or physiological functions of body are affected or not affected. And then, of course, there is another problem that when wanting this kind of research to be performed, all these devices meet safety standards. So meaning you go to the room where there is plenty of cell phones, Wi-Fi, and so on and so forth. Everything is fulfilling safety standards, and in the end they say that most of exposure you get from your cell phone when you are talking and it is close to your head, and anything else which is a little bit further, it is just a tiny, tiny fraction of safety standards, so meaning there is no problem. But fact that some things are exposed 24/7 for years and years and years, we don't know at all whether it has any effect or not. So to your question, are we affected by this kind of 24/7 exposures or not? Nobody knows. There is no information, there is no studies. Certainly, some people are affected mentally. They are thinking and they are worried and they are concerned about it. What causes to them some stress, bigger or smaller? But otherwise, whether it has any impact on our physiology, nobody knows. We don't know at all. We just, this technology is being implemented because it meets safety standards, and safety standards are wonderful. They protect everybody, anytime, anywhere. And that's why we can have all this technology. Nobody needs to ask anybody permission. We can have it because it is safe. But we don't know about effects at all.
Okay, we have a final question. Yes.
Thank you. My name is Terje Engvall. I represent the Norwegian Post and Telecommunications Authority, also Deltok. I'm responsible for the measurements being done in Norway on working places, private homes, and so on. And our experience, and we focus on mobile cell phone hold against the head. And I think as a scientist, I would focus on that as well. And that's why, because that is the strongest source we have for normal people. Then I got a little bit confused when you started to mix in the wireless networks in schools, because our experience is that the exposure from the VLANs or the Wi-Fi is approximately 1,000 to, let's say, 10,000 times weaker than the exposure from the mobile phone. So I was wondering why you mix that in your conclusion. Could you say a few words to that?
Yeah. This IARC classification, which was in 2011, it was not only about cell phone radiation. It was classification that concerns all cell phone-like radiation, meaning also base station radiation or wireless networks. Any device that emits radiation, radio frequency modulated electromagnetic radiation, it is considered as possible carcinogen. Of course, then when something is emitting more or less and providing more or less of exposure, that's of course important factor. And as you said, cell phone, we are getting the most of our exposure from cell phone, not only here in Norway, but anywhere else around the world. Most of exposure what people are getting, they are getting from cell phone kept to head or somewhere on body when they are talking. But this, that something is 1,000 or 10,000 times less exposure than this provided by cell phone. When, as I compared with epidemiological studies, when we are administering toxic chemicals to animals to find out whether they are toxic really, and we give 10,000 times higher dose than normally person we expose in real life, and we see some effects, then it is cause for concern. This same way, that you have a radio frequency radiation emitted by wireless network, and then you expose cells to 10,000 times higher exposure, so meaning radiation level which is coming like from cell phone. And when you see effects, then you can think, could also this Wi-Fi, even though it is 10,000 times lesser, have some effects? And as I said also, with Wi-Fi, when it is exposures are 24/7, we don't have any information about this, how this affects our cells. Maybe it doesn't affect at all, or maybe it affects, but saying a priori without any studies that, well, it is 10,000 times less than safety standards, then it is just fine. Well, as I said, when you use for 10 years your safe cell phone fulfilling safety standards, you get increased risk of brain cancer. And let's not forget this. The safety standard is 2 watts per kilogram. Regular cell phone, what we are mostly using, and the majority of cell phones, they don't emit so much radiation. They emit 0.1 watts per kilogram or less. So meaning most of those cell phones that we use, that they fulfill safety standards, they emit much less radiation than the safety standard emits. And by using this much less emitting cell phone, we still get this increasing risk of brain cancer. So it means that those safety standards are not really good, because if we are using safety standard is, my cell is emitting 10 times less, and I still, after 10 years, have increased risk of brain cancer, so there is something very bad. What if this cell phone will be emitting all the time this safety standard limit, which is legally permitted? So meaning this first question what comes and first problem is, are those safety standards correct? Are they based on really this science what is right now available? They were set in 1998, when there was much less of different studies done. And these studies on cells grown in laboratory are not taken properly into consideration as indicators of potential problems and potential risks. So once we answer the question, are those safety standards really protecting and really working well, then we can say, all right, if something is so many times less than safety standard, so maybe it is okay or maybe it is not okay. But first of all, is this safety standard correct? Because 10 times lower exposure than safety standard can lead me. And then there are those protection factors 100 times. So then still 10 times less, and I don't know whether the safety standards are correct. When I go to shop, buy a safe device, and my risk of brain cancer is increasing.
We have no more questions. Thank you very much for your very interesting talk and answering of many questions. You have left a really big footprint in our brains about what is going on and what is lacking. We have just a little memory from this event. Det en folkefiende av Ibsen.